Shalom, and welcome back to the broadcast. Today is May 16th. It's Tuesday, and we are still working through the book of Revelation. The website, scriptureandprophecy.com, that's where you can go to support this work. If you're being blessed, if you're being fed by this work, then consider supporting it. We're really looking for more Patreon subscribers, which is patreon.com/truthfed. And that's just one of several ways that you can support this mission of getting out the word, getting out the truth. Today we're going to be going over chapter 18 in the book of Revelation. We spent 2 weeks on chapter 17, and I presented some ideas and some thoughts and some alternative views. But today I'm just going to be upfront with you and just let you know that I believe, and it's not a I want to believe, it's not a thing that I like, it just seems to fit best in my view. I believe that the United States fits Revelation 18 in a very painful and obvious way. But really it's only obvious if you understand some basic facts, and sadly, most Americans, especially Christian Americans, are unbelievably ignorant about these basic things, and therefore they have a Disneyland view of the United States. Now, unfortunately, this is just a short podcast, not a documentary, so I can't go into all the history of all the symbolism and all the monuments and things in Washington, D.C., and you really got to research this stuff for yourself to have an understanding. And, originally I had not planned on presenting this belief, only because I've put out this possibility in other podcasts probably a dozen times or more. All you have to do is go to the YouTube channel and hit the little search box and type in Babylon. You'll find endless. And, but I just can't go through Revelation 18 and not point out what I think is obvious. And by the way, I'm not saying this is 100% that I've got it all figured out or anything like that. I'm just saying this is what I believe the scriptures are pointing to. And I feel like I've made that very clear in the last 2 studies when I presented a Middle Eastern nation as a possibility. And so I've given you some different views. So again, this is not something I think is set in stone, but I'd be very surprised if it turns out to be a different way. Another thing that I've been thinking and considering is, what if Revelation 17 is talking about the Vatican, and 18 is talking about the merchant and political version of Babylon, or which you may have heard described as the daughter of Babylon, and then the Vatican being most likely the mother of harlots. And just a couple of verses about the daughter of Babylon. If we go to... let me get my stuff pulled up here. If we go to Psalm 137... Psalm 137 verse 8 says, "O daughter of Babylon, who art to be destroyed. Who art to be destroyed. Happy shall he be that rewardeth thee as thou hast served us." Isaiah chapter 47 is also about the daughter of Babylon. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll just read a few verses. It says, "Come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground, there is no throne. O daughter of the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called tender and delicate. Take the millstones and grind meal, uncover thy locks, make bare the leg, uncover the thigh, pass over the rivers, thy nakedness shall be uncovered. Yea, thy shame shall be seen, I will take vengeance, and I will not meet thee as a man." Zechariah chapter 2, verses 7 through 9. "Deliver thyself, O Zion, thy dwellest with the daughter of Babylon." Deliver thyself, O Zion, that dwellest with the daughter of Babylon. For thus saith the Lord of hosts, After the glory he has sent me into the nations which spoiled you. For he that touches you touches the apple of his eye. A couple of foundational points that I want to make about America before I read chapter 18 is, first off, I've heard it said that that Babylon has to be a city, it can't be a nation, and I just want to say, first of all, that's cleared up real easily. I think it does involve a city, or maybe a couple of cities. But it can also be referring to a nation, and we see that if we go to Jeremiah chapter 50, which, by the way, Jeremiah chapter 50 and 51 is all about Babylon, both the current time Babylon that Jeremiah was speaking to directly, and the coming Babylon that he was speaking to. But if you go to if you go to Jeremiah 50 and you go to verse 12, and again it talks about Babylon having this mother, by the way. It says, your mother shall be sore confounded. She that bare you shall be ashamed. Behold, the hindermost of the nations, this is talking about Babylon, the hindermost of the nations, which, by the way, hindermost means it's kind of like speaking to a new nation or a latter time nation, which just gives more credibility to this view. The hindermost, the latter of the nations, shall be a wilderness, a dry land, a desert, meaning it's going to be completely annihilated, destroyed. And so there we see Babylon referred to as a nation right there, not just a city. And so I think that clears it up very, very, makes it very, very clear. And like I said, Babylon is also referred to here in Jeremiah as a latter days nation, a last days nation, or a newer nation of that time. The second point I want to make, and then I'll just start reading. There's some things you need to understand. Specifically, think about the United Nations, as that's our current world government system. And where is it? It just happens to reside in New York City, to be exact. Oh, by the way, New York City has a small port suburb called Babylon, but I'm sure that's just coincidence. Go look it up. In regards to the United Nations, America provides the large majority of the funding for both security and all of that. I mean, a large bulk of the funding is funded by the United States, and America is one of only 5 permanent UN security members and wields great power over the UN through its veto. And so, technically, the United States is the one who controls the United Nations, who is the current form of world government. And somehow people miss this point or overlook this, and I'm just like, how do you not see this? Now, there's some other greater points than this that are made as we read through Revelation chapter 18, and we're going to visit those, but I just want to read it first so you can hear the words, and then I'll go through and point out the things that I think are just obvious. So let's begin. Revelation chapter 18. And after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, has become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities. Reward her even as she rewarded you, and double unto her double according to her works. In the cup which she hath filled, fill to her double. How much she hath glorified herself and lived deliciously, so much torment and sorrow give her. For she saith in her heart, I sit as a queen, and I am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. Therefore her plague come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judgeth her. And the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her when they shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, the great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour thy judgment come. And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise any more. The merchandise of gold and of silver and of precious stones and of pearls and of fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet, and all thyine wood, and all manner vessels of ivory, and all manner vessels of most precious wood, and of brass and iron and marble, and cinnamon, and odors, and ointments, and frankincense, and wine, and oil, and fine flour, and wheat, and beast, and sheep, and horses, and chariots, and slaves, and the souls of men. And the fruits that thou soul lusted after are departed from thee, and all things which were dainty and goodly are departed from thee, and thou shalt find them no more at all. The merchants of these things which were made rich by her shall stand afar off for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, the great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour so great riches is come to naught, and every shipmaster and all the company in ships and sailors, and as many as trade by the sea, stood afar off, and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What city is like unto this great city? And they cast dust on their heads, and cried, weeping and wailing, saying, Alas, alas, the great city, wherein we made rich all that had ships in the sea, by reason of her costliness. For in 1 hour she is made desolate. Rejoice over her, thou heaven, and ye holy apostles and prophets, for God hath avenged you on her. And a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone, and cast it into the sea, saying, Thus with violence shall the great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all. And the voice of the harpers and musicians and pipers and trumpeters shall be heard no more at all in thee, and no craftsman of whatever he be shall be found any more in thee, and the sound of a millstone shall be heard no more at all in thee, and the light of the candle shall shine no more at all in thee, and the voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. For thy merchants were the great men of earth, for by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. And in her was found the blood of prophets, and of saints, and of all that were slain upon the earth. That is chapter 18, and there's, like I said, there's so many moving parts, and there's certainly some things that don't fit well. So let's just get started with this. At the very beginning it says, has fallen. Babylon has fallen, and I've struggled with this because, in chapter 14, it says it's fallen, and I'm like, how can it be destroyed here, but it's fallen here? And what I think it's getting at is that it's fallen from whatever it used to be, right? It used to be something else, now it's fallen, and it's become something else. And this is what the scriptures say. In verse 2 it says, And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hateful bird. And when I look at what's happening in this country, do you not see some of this? It says in verse 3, "For all nations have drunk the wine of the wrath of her fornication." Something interesting is the word that we translate as fornication is the Greek word porneia, which is where we get our word pornography. And it literally means harlotry, including adultery or incest. And I just find that interesting because one of the things that the United States happens to be the largest exporter in the world of is pornography. The United States owns more porn websites than any country. The world consumes American pornography. These are facts that people don't want to talk about much. People don't want to talk about the 3,500 to 4,000 babies that are murdered every single day, and now we even sell their body parts and nobody bats an eye. Nobody wants to talk about this sexual immorality that we export. Every form of sexual immorality. Every wicked form. And you saw the stuff that came out during the WikiLeaks. There's this dark side that nobody ever wants to talk about. It says, "For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication." And I just explained to you what that means, but it can also mean idolatry. "And the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. And the merchants of the earth are waxed rich." Listen, the merchants of the earth, that means merchants all around the world, are getting rich through the abundance of her delicacies. Whatever this place is, it buys in abundance. So much so that merchants all around the world are getting rich off this one particular place. Now, I'm sorry, but the world is not getting waxed rich off the Vatican. The world is not getting rich off of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is getting rich off the world. This is talking about a place that the merchants around the world are getting rich by selling to. I can only think of one nation that the whole world gets rich selling to, the largest consumer nation to ever exist. The richest and most prosperous nation to ever exist. One of the most powerful military nations to ever exist, and somehow I'm supposed to believe from prophecy teachers that God just accidentally overlooked this place moving into the last days, who happens to be one of the big reasons why Israel is even in the land again. And, the UN, guys, you've got to really, really be pushing things under the rug to ignore these facts. "And I heard another voice from heaven saying, 'Come out of her, my people, that you be not partakers of her sins, and that you receive not of her plagues.'" Whatever this place is, his people are there. Enough so that he's warning them to come out. And I struggle with that because I don't know how God expects us to come out. Because let's say that this is Babylon, and we are moving into the last days. Well, how are we supposed to get out? It's not like it used to be where you just put a backpack on you and you walk out. You've got customs to go through. You've got to have passports. You got to have a place to go. You got to have a decent chunk of money to do it. So I'm not really sure about that. I thought maybe it's a rapture, but when he says come out of her, the word harpazo is not used. So I don't know. Maybe it'll make more sense when it's time. It says, verse 5, "For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities." It says, "Reward her even as she rewarded you, and double unto her double according to her works, in the cup which she hath filled with her double." This is how much judgment she gets. In verse 7 it says, "How much she hath glorified herself, and lived deliciously, so much torment and sorrow give her." So in other words, as much as she's lived, it's very clear, as much as she's lived deliciously, lived in luxury, and glorified herself, and said, "I sit as a queen, I'm a widow, I should sell." This is what people say. This is what people believe. Sit around your dinner table. Most people, well, that'll never happen. That'll never happen. I don't know how, I've stopped talking to people about it. About how, things may not always be perfect here. I mean, they're not perfect here anyway, but people are just blind. As long as they can go to Starbucks and get a coffee and pull into their local grocery mart and get groceries, to them the world's fine. But this is saying, in the way that she's lived deliciously and the way she's glorified herself, that's how much torment she's going to get. Her plagues are going to come in one day, it says, death and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire. And the kings of the earth, who have committed fornication with her, and lived deliciously with her, shall bewail her and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off for fear of her torment, saying, what is like this great city? It'll be shocking to the world that this could happen. For in 1 hour thy judgment has come. Verse 11, and the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her. And then it goes on to say why. The merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, because for no man buy their merchandise anymore. Folks, if the Vatican burned down today, would the world say, oh my gosh, who's going to buy all of our stuff? Would the merchants around the world weep saying that? If Saudi Arabia burned today, would the merchants around the world go, oh my gosh, who's going to buy all of our goods? Would China be saying, oh no, who are we going to sell all this cheap stuff to? No. There's only one place that would happen, where the merchants all around the world would weep. Not only that, let's consider this. The United States US dollar is the world reserve currency. If the US were to fall, guess what? So does every economy and market in the world. Every single one, like dominoes. Everything is pinned to that dollar bill. Oil is traded in that dollar bill. Major goods are traded in that dollar bill. It's the world reserve currency. That's why we're able to print so much money. That's why we're able to be trillions of dollars in debt and still be standing. Because you can't crash that thing. You can't let it go. You can't move away from it, or every economy around the world dumps. And so whenever this place Babylon gets destroyed, it says the merchants of the earth, that means all around, we're going to weep and mourn, because now no man buys their merchandise anymore. And then of course it goes on to list all these things that people buy. It says, and the fruits that thy soul lusted after depart from thee, and all the things which were dainty and goodly are departed from thee, and thou shalt find them no more at all. The merchants of these things, which were made rich by her, Babylon, shall stand afar off for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing. Again, it keeps bringing this up about the merchants. How many times does it talk about how the merchants are the ones who are going to be weeping and wailing, saying, who are we going to sell to? This place bought so much of our stuff. And they go on to say in verse 17, for in 1 hour such great riches came to nothing. By the way, one of the busiest places and busiest harbors are right there in New York City, shipping goods all over the place. So many boats out there, so many big giant ships out there. And it says every shipmaster and all the company and ships and sailors and as many that trade by the sea stood afar off and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, what city is like unto this great city? Now, one of the arguments that I've heard, and I'm going to point it out because I'm not just about making my point. I want you to have things to think about. One of the points that's made for it being a Middle Eastern nation is this: and they cast dust on their heads and cried, weeping and wailing, saying, alas, the great city. And so I've heard it say, where do people cast dust on their heads? That's not an American custom. Well, it's not America who's casting dust on their heads. It's other nations and other people and other vendors and shipmasters and stuff. So, just for what that's worth. Here's another thing. whatever this place is, it has a lot of musicians and things like that, because the verse 22 says, and it goes on, and the voice of the harpers and the musicians and the pipers and the trumpeters shall not be heard in you anymore. No craftsman's going to be found anymore. People who do things, create things. The sound of a millstone, I think of factories and things like that, shall be heard no more. Here's another key, because it goes out of the way to make this fact. It says the light of the candle, which the candle represents the assembly, or as we would call it today, the church. The light of the candle shall shine in you no more. Whatever this place is, that candle exists there. The voice of the bridegroom. Who's the bridegroom? Jesus. The voice of the bridegroom won't be heard in you anymore, which means it was heard in you up until this point. And the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. In other words, there's such a significant amount of God's people in this place that it has to talk about it several times throughout this chapter. Multiple times. It says up here, in verse 4? Come out of her, my people. It makes it known that God's people are there. Come out of her. And then we have here again, verse 23, looking at three angles of it. It's just talking about the church, the bridegroom, and the bride, saying those people, they're not going to be heard in you anymore, which means they are currently heard. And that's a fact that needs to be understood, because if we're talking about like Saudi Arabia as an example, there's a very small amount of the bride and the bridegroom. You know what I'm saying? There must be a significant amount of these people for it to go out of its way multiple times to say, come out of her, and to warn Babylon that these people won't be heard in you again. Who are the most powerful men in the world? I think about people who lead the world, and usually it's these tech giant business owners, right? Think about even Donald Trump. Billionaire becomes president. You think about Zuckerberg, Facebook. You think about Microsoft and Apple, and these places are the owners of cable companies, and these people are really who's in control of the world, right? And it says right here, after it says, the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee, it says, for thy merchants, thy businessmen, were the great men of the earth. For by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. People don't understand the large amount of deception that comes through the television and through media, through social media, through news. They have no idea. All the nations are being deceived by this. 99% of the people are being deceived by this. You go to church, most everybody in there is brainwashed by the media, by Babylon. It says, for thy sorceries. The word sorceries there, that's the Greek word pharmakia, where we get the word pharmaceutical, pharmacy. Who's the biggest pusher of pharmaceuticals in the world? You guessed it. It can literally mean medication, or extension means magic or sorcery or witchcraft. Which, by the way, which is what the Bible has always identified that stuff as. Today we just think, oh, it's a pill. It'll mask my symptoms. Or, we just look at it as commonplace because we've, like a frog in boiling water, the temperature's been just turned up gradually. But the Bible declares this stuff to be sorcery. And then it ends with, and in her was found the blood of prophets and saints that were slain upon the earth. Obviously, there's, this is another one of those things that it's either talking about something else, because a lot of people make the argument, the Vatican, the Roman Catholic Church, is drunk on the blood of the saints, right? Like it says in chapter 17. They've killed millions, estimated between 50 and 100 million Christians have been killed by the Roman Catholic Church since its creation. And so maybe that's what it's referring to, or maybe things are going to turn even darker in the United States of America. I don't know. But that is the end of the study. And look, guys, I could be wrong about this stuff. And I always preface that, I'm just looking at it. I look through the glass dimly just like all of you. But you'd be hard-pressed to convince me that another nation fits these categories, especially when dealing with the merchants of the world and the merchants, businessmen being the great men of the earth, and the place happens to have a significant amount of the bride and the bridegroom, and God's telling that his people to get out of there. It lives deliciously and luxury, and the whole world was going to mourn when it, you'd be hard-pressed to convince me of another place. If it is another place, then it's yet to develop, or it's in development, which means this is a lot further down the road. And that very may well be. We may go 10, 15, 20 years, and another place somewhere in the Middle East suddenly comes to power and becomes the great merchant of the world, or the great consumer and rich, city of the world. That absolutely that could happen. But if we are living in the last days today, and I believe that we are, then I can't see another option. This is the option that would best fit to this, today. And look, I know some of you disagree with me, and that's fine, and I respect your opinion. Like I said, I don't have it all figured out. I'm just sharing with you what I believe. And so that is the study of Babylon. We've done 3 episodes. An episode 2 weeks ago, when I first started chapter 17, I discussed the possibility of Babylon being a Middle Eastern nation, and I gave you all the reasons why that's a possibility. And then we talked about the beast, and I gave you some ideas on that. And then today is chapter 18, dealing with why America is a good candidate for Babylon. But like I've said before, this thing has a lot more moving parts than I think we understand. I think it's possible that it has 3 moving parts. I don't have the scripture right in front of me, but I believe somewhere in chapter 16, it talks about that great city being divided into 3. Right here it is, verse 19. So this chapter 16, verse 19. And that great city was divided into 3 parts. And the cities of the nations fell, and great Babylon came in remembrance before God to give unto her the cup of wine of the fierceness of his wrath. So I think there's more to this than we understand. I think that's why it uses the word mystery. It's not called Mystery Babylon. It just uses the word mystery. Here's a mystery: Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. And, we have to look at the Old Testament scriptures, Jeremiah chapter 50 and 51, as a great example for studying all this. And so who knows? But I wanted to share with you that view. I don't want this to be true. It's some people will accuse me of hating the United States of America for pointing out the obvious. It's like you're not allowed to point out these facts. And so that almost always inevitably comes when I do this podcast. When I talk about Babylon and America in the same thing, I usually have to deal with a lot of flack from people. But anyway, at this point, I'm just rambling. That's the show for you this morning. Hey, if this is blessing you, I want to hear about it in the comments. And you can support this mission again, scriptureandprophecy.com. I would love to have you as a Patreon subscriber. You can do that for $1 up to whatever you want. You can also donate, and there's a post office box. That's all at the website. And I should be back with you again on Friday for this week's message. Peace and grace be with all of you, and God bless.